Dear listener, I've returned from South by Southwest filled with more than enough brisket, breakfast tacos, and Shiner Bock to challenge my beltline. I also come bearing gifts for you in the form of recorded interviews. If you followed along with my live blog from South by Southwest last week, and for those of you that didn't, check the link in our show notes, you'll know that I spoke with a number of key medical marketing leaders on the ground in Austin. Those takeouts, including insights from Amgen, Marina Maher Communications, and Compass Pathways, will be featured in next week's podcast. For this week's pod, we have an important conversation further tying in pharma brands to the world of sports. Interestingly, this week's podcast is being released on opening day, which is timely because the MLB just made some medical marketing news of its own. On Tuesday, AbbVie announced that it will serve as the official pharmaceutical partner of the MLB. While America's Pastime is kicking off its season, our episode today focuses on America's most popular sport, football. Today I'm joined by Pro Football Hall of Famer Barry Sanders, who serves as a spokesperson for Amgen in its campaign raising awareness about cardiovascular disease, namely LDL-C, or bad cholesterol. Sanders, who suffered a heart attack in 2024, has partnered with the pharma giant to use his stature as the greatest living running back to raise awareness around LDL-C testing. He has starred in the making of a heart attack documentary sponsored by Amgen and participated in a panel discussion about the issue at South by Southwest. I caught up with Sanders afterwards to chat about his campaign work, the importance of cardiovascular health, and even some X's and O's football talk. And for our trend segment, you'll hear from Jameson, Steve, and Lesha with a preview of the 2026 MM+M Transform Conference, which is scheduled for this coming Tuesday, March 31st in downtown Manhattan. Usually when I do podcast interviews, I have to say this person is from this organization, whatever. I think I don't even know how to say, you are Barry Sanders. You are Pro Football Hall of Famer. I'm a huge football fan. I want to get to that towards the end of the interview, but you're here for an entirely different mission. Talk about the work with Amgen and how that all came together.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm really excited and fortunate to team up with Amgen. You know, we did the documentary called The Making of a Heart Attack, which we featured my story as well as the story of several other individuals who've suffered heart attack and stroke. And, you know, I suffered my heart attack in the summer of 2024. And so it was something that was just very personal to me, you know, and so when I had the opportunity to team up with Amgen, it was just a natural fit. You know, and I felt like, you know, I'd like to be able to share my story and use whatever platform I have to be able to help people. And so that's kind of how it came about.
I'm curious too, because I grew up with a heart condition. I come from a family with a lot of different cardiovascular issues and stuff. I know it's not an easy thing to talk about that. What was that like for you? Because obviously you're so well renowned and so much of your life has been out there for the general public, but there is something I imagine you want to keep to yourself. Was that ever part of it, or how'd that come together?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a different type of conversation that I'm used to having in sort of the public square, but it's certainly one that's important, and one that, you know, when I think about, just aside from my particular individual story, I mean, I think about just all the other people that I know, right, who, you know like personally, right, like, you know, who either suffered heart attack or stroke, or know someone who's had a heart attack or stroke. So it's just one of those things where, yeah, I mean, it's just, beside the fact that obviously it hit close to home with me, it was certainly a different conversation again to have in the public square, but it was one that was very real, one that's very recent and needed to happen, you know.
I'm curious if going through this, like, I imagine you've heard other people's stories in terms of their experience having, you know, high cholesterol, heart attack, any of that sort of stuff. Has any of that resonated with you where it's like, okay, I went through this very, you know, frightening personal thing, but there's plenty of other people that go through that too. Does any of that resonate?
Absolutely. It resonates because, yeah, I mean, you know, like I was saying before, I mean, I know not just with my story, but people that I know that I'm close to who's suffered from it, or someone, you know, a close family member or whatever. And again, when you talk about risk factors, right, there are different risk factors, and some of it is hereditary and some of it one thing or the other. And so I think that certainly creates a bond, you know, with those people who experience those things. And you use the word resonate. Yes. I mean, those are things that certainly hit close to home. You know what they're going through, you know, some of the things they battled, you know, and that's why it's important to get the word out.
And I'm curious what that's been like, because obviously you've been a part of so many different, sponsorship opportunities and stuff. And whether that's, like I think about athletes and it's like shoes or cleats and stuff like that, apparel, you think about any sort of like food brand or something like that. Pharma is different that way. How has that been like for you in terms of being able to work on that messaging and go public that way?
Oh, yeah. I mean, just think about, hey, look, I've been a Nike representative for 30 years. I'm fortunate to have teamed up with other companies, and it's certainly a different message, right? But it's an extremely important message. Talking about heart health, talking about, encouraging people to go to the doctor, find out what your LDL-C number is. And that's the only way to find out. So, and I guess I can say that, the conversation has evolved, but again, it's one that's very, very much close to home. I'm learning that it's one that a lot of my fans and people that follow me have their own stories to tell. And, it's really created a new opportunity to really have that sort of exchange with fans and things like that. And so I just see it as a new opportunity. And it's something that, obviously it happened. And at the time, obviously, it's not the greatest news. But at the same time, working with docs and trying to get things under control for me personally, and then just being able to have that conversation, right? As well as, learning really, whether it's something that comes from hereditary or something that comes from, wherever, that there is hope, right? That, the sooner you try to get your LDL-C down, the better, right? And think about all the other health conversations you can have out here, then I think this is a pretty important one.
I'm curious too. We've covered a lot, for our publication where it's a lot of different athletes, leagues, franchises get involved with different health brands and stuff. And I think you're just another example of that, and obviously a very prominent one. To any athletes that might be out there, I think about like Charles Barkley's doing a lot of stuff with Roe now, and you see the same thing with Serena Williams. Being able to have that message of like, hey, you can live a healthier lifestyle, you can focus on well-being and stuff, and having an athlete be the center of that. What would you say to other athletes who might be considering that or might get approached by a company and say, hey, here's an opportunity to go do this?
Yeah, I think it's certainly something that's probably going to happen more. I think because of how many athletes take it upon themselves, to really attack their platform, and do what they can with their platform, that it's, let's say when I left professional sports 20 something years ago, that wasn't really a thing, right? There was no such thing as a podcast, right? Only certain guys kind of went into the media, right? But now everyone, has a platform, right? Or a lot more guys, use that platform. So I think you'll definitely see a lot more of it. I think it makes a lot of sense. It has to make sense for both sides, right? But health and wellness and taking care of your heart and having important conversations with your doctor. I mean, I think that's a message that people will always be able to relate to, and something that, most people have been impacted by directly or indirectly. So yeah, it's an important message.
I really appreciate you going through all the healthcare topics for this conversation. Again, I'm a huge football fan, so if you can indulge me just with a couple football questions. I was actually at a bar last night because we're recording this day after St. Patrick's Day. And there was a guy that I would just end up talking to. He's like, who I saw on the plane the other day? I saw Barry Sanders. I'm like, no kidding. I'm interviewing Barry Sanders. And he was like, I was so starstruck and I didn't want to bother him because he was just sitting there and everything. But he grew up a huge Buffalo Bills fan. And he used to talk about you just cutting them up anytime that you guys went and played up in Orchard Park. And it made me think, for so much, I think like the past decade, the league was so pass focused, and it was like you see guys throwing for 5,000 yards, all these touchdowns and stuff. In the last couple of years, like whether it's Saquon leading the Eagles to the Super Bowl, Kenny Walker win MVP in this year's Super Bowl, there has been a shift towards more of the running game. I'm curious just how you think you would fit into this modern NFL that is kind of embracing more of the ground and pound as opposed to like, hey, we have to air it out all the time.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's an interesting conversation. How I would fit in. I've had a front row seat to the Lions run attack. And, if you're saying that, you'll give me the Lions offensive line currently today, then I'll take it. I'll take it. But no, I think you look at just the creativity on offense and with offensive, how they have expanded since I've been out of the game, right? Pistol formations or run pass options and all this kind of stuff. I mean, they didn't have a lot of that in the 90s. And so, but it's been a treat for me to watch what Kenneth Walker did this past season and what Saquon did in running for 2,000 yards the year they won the Super Bowl, just a year removed from that, or Derrick Henry, or watching David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. And so I do feel like in the last year or so, there's been a resurgence of the running game. And even in the midst of all those years where the league was pass happy, you take a team like the San Francisco 49ers, Christian McCaffrey and even others before Christian, but they've always been able to run, right? For some reason, they've always been able to run the football. The Niners have, and a lot of teams, it's a trendy league, right? It's a trendy league. So, it's funny because I always said, everybody's not Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, right? So, you want to be careful about just lining up with just any old quarterback passing 50 times a game. I don't think that's going to work. I never thought that would work, but there's a few unique talents, like Patrick Mahomes, right? You understand why they would have a very pass heavy offense, which ironically that's where Kenneth Walker's headed.
Yeah.
That's going to be interesting to see how that works, right? But anyway, yeah. From a former running back in the game, it was definitely a treat to see Kenneth Walker and he's had a great career in Seattle. Every year he's been there. He's been a big part of what they do in the running game, and definitely trending back in the running backs, favor in the league these days.
And you guys are such a brotherhood too. I think of like any sort of like group in terms of positions. I feel like running backs always have that kind of like camaraderie among themselves. Every wide receiver's out for themselves for the most part, but running backs are like, high tide lifts all boats. I had one more question for you just because I really appreciate the time talking about the Amgen stuff, but just from a football perspective, you brought up the Lions, and obviously, you are, I would say, probably the most famous Lion in team history, and they came so close a couple of years ago, losing the Niners in the NFC Championship game. Obviously, last year didn't go the way they wanted it to, but they're trying to restock for this upcoming season. What, just from your own vantage point, what is the thing that could push them over the edge? What's the silver bullet? What's missing?
Well, I think we're in a good situation. I mean, you look at our division; it's extremely competitive, right? The Bears won 11 games. Right, and they won the division. Everyone else had 9 wins. It doesn't get much more competitive than that. I mean, and I think across the NFL they like seeing that sort of parity. So I don't think we're far off. Aiden Hutchinson, he's back and better than ever. We still have a great nucleus of guys, Jared Goff and David Montgomery. That's gonna be a loss. That's gonna be a big loss. I don't know who we'll replace him with. I think the Pacheco kid come from Kansas City.
He runs hard too.
Yeah, he runs hard. Yeah, and we'll see how that works out. I think he's a different type of runner than David Montgomery, but we still obviously have Jahmyr Gibbs. We still have all the receivers. St. Brown and Williams and the tight end. So yeah, I think that we're in a good situation. I mean, if Seattle can win it, right? And you got a new coaching staff and Sam Darnold, he's been there, just got there. So I think there's hope for us. We were just barely out of the playoff picture. There's no need to panic. Just go back to work, understanding that those close division games. I mean, we picked the worst week to have our worst game. I think the second to the last game of the season against Minnesota. On the road. I mean, that game probably kicked us out of the playoffs. But I think we're still there. We're still there, and we still have a lot of the pieces that can get us there. So I definitely still have hope.
It's certainly an exciting brand of football, so I'll be curious to see how it all plays out this season. I appreciate you indulging me with a couple of questions there. Just to wrap, is there anything else that our audience should keep in mind about the work that you're doing with Amgen and just cardiovascular health, talking about LDL-C in general, anything they should keep in mind?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They can go to attackheartdisease.com/documentary. They can look at the documentary that I was able to partner with Amgen on and really see my story as well as some others, but just being proactive about their heart health and having that conversation with the doctor. If you don't know kind of where you are with your bad cholesterol numbers, to find out and take great care of yourself.
Awesome. Barry, really appreciate the time.
Very welcome.
All right. This week, we have a big event coming up, don't we, Steve and Lesha?
We do.
We do indeed. The Transform Conference.
Yeah. So in New York City on Tuesday, March 31st. Man, so excited that I'm adding days to the calendar. March 31st.
Let's not make March last any longer than it has.
God, this month is so incredibly long. It just never ends. But I'm going to get to the plug here. March 31st in New York City, our Transform conference. It's our big conference every year, and it's got an incredible lineup. And we're going to talk about it a bit here today, to give you a little preview of what to expect. So, Steve, I'll hand it over to you because I'll talk about keynotes in a second, but you've got a panel to start the day that you were really excited to pitch when we started talking about topics back in November, October, whenever it was.
Yeah, and I'm still really excited about this one. It's about how pharma can tout science in its communications and what exactly it should do and to what extent it should use science. Science is kind of a tough sell with the general audience right now. There's a great degree, for whatever reason, there's a great degree of skepticism about science. I mean, all you have to do is look at the discussion around vaccines to see that. And a couple of years ago, a pharma company did a very expensive campaign about how it was a science company, which fell on deaf ears and rang a little hollow, frankly. That said, there is a huge part of the population that realizes the value of science. So we've got two really great speakers, Steve Alpern and Jim Potter, who are going to talk about, how pharma needs to use science or not use science in communicating its benefits. I'm really interested in this.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what Jim Potter has to say. Jim has been all over everything this administration has been doing, has impacted this industry, has impacted the science of this industry. And he usually has, I don't want to say hot takes, but they're usually pretty lukewarm, occasionally hot. So I feel like he's going to have a lot to say. And Lesha, I know, you are our policy expert. Is there anything that you're kind of expecting out of this panel, given the policy implications that are impacting this industry?
Yeah, I mean, this sort of relates to my own panel, the DTC dilemma, which is all about the FDA crackdown stuff, and sort of how that's impacting how marketers are doing their work. And, the topic of Steve's panel, this idea of needing to sell the science or to really make people understand the science and that, that pharma is standing behind it is also a theme I just heard with my panelists in our prep call. So I think it's going to be a theme throughout the entire event. But one of the things that was brought up is, these FDA letters that we've covered. We've all done a good job of covering them. A lot of them kind of question the data, question the science, question how it's portrayed. And it's really going to be incumbent on marketers to figure out a way to make sure that they're standing behind it and portraying that, and also making sure that's getting into the LLMs and the AI models in the right way.
Yeah, I think it should shape up to be a couple really interesting conversations. I mean, the one that I am most excited for during the day, or one of the two that I'm most excited for, the one that I'm hosting that I think I might be most excited for, is our opening keynote with Brian Cantwell, the vice president and head of AI for Bayer Pharmaceuticals. I saw Brian speak back in September at an event, and he was fantastic. Bayer seems to be way ahead on the AI front when it comes to pharma. And Brian and I spoke last week, and he's got some really interesting things to say about what Bayer is doing and how they are building Bayer for the future. He's in a particularly interesting position that Bayer is actively trying to I think he said double. I think their benchmark is double their pharma side of the business in the next 3 to 5 years. And with that, they can't double overhead. So they're using AI to, essentially build the business for the future as they grow. And so it's kind of a fascinating story for them to tell of how they're going to, really scale the pharma side of Bayer using AI. So it should be a great conversation to start. And, I'm curious from Steve and Lesha, where do you think AI is going to fit into the conversation on Tuesday? Is it going to dominate, or is it going to kind of be an underlying theme throughout the day?
Well, how is it going to fit in? Everywhere. I mean, it's like you go to a medical marketing conference and an AI conference breaks out. I mean, you could go to anything right now involving business of any sort, and all anyone's talking about is AI. I was at a brunch yesterday with 3 of the 5 people at the table were attorneys, and it's largely what the entire discussion was about AI and its uses and how it's going to disrupt everything, and how to sort of future-proof careers around it. And it's the same thing in medical marketing. So I would be willing to bet $100 that every single panel, including one of the other ones I do about patient centricity, will be largely about AI.
I agree. I mean, I think it's less of a buzzword now than it was a couple years ago, but it is so much more implemented in like the pathways of every aspect of marketing now that there's no way that people won't be kind of inherently talking about it, kind of even in these other topics. I mean, even for my panel discussion I just had with my panelists on the DTC one, they brought up AI and why GEO is like the most important thing right now in marketers' minds. And like, how do you make sure that the information you're putting out there as a brand is getting picked up by the LLMs in the right way? And that's kind of one of their biggest priorities. So I think it's going to be probably included kind of inherently in every conversation, but I am curious to hear your panel in the afternoon, Jameson, and it's the question, when will AI truly transform marketing? Because that's kind of a big question. I'm curious to hear what people have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, Empiricus is a really good brand, great company to have on that panel. I think they are doing a lot of interesting work in the HCP space, trying to make reach out to HCPs be a lot smarter and more effective. So it'll be interesting what they have to say. We're going to try to make that session a little interactive, give the audience an opportunity to engage with us and kind of give everybody in the room an idea of where everybody feels they are in regards to AI. Because the innovation survey that Steve wrote about back in November, it was kind of amazing to see. I think it was over half of respondents felt that their companies are nowhere close to where they need to be on AI, and so this industry is trying to get there, but it's obvious that they're not there yet.
Yeah, I think that's an important talking point, Jameson, but it's also really important to keep in mind that whatever the technology du jour is, pharma marketers feel like they're not where they need to be. It's the grass is always greener, and it's a competitive thing too. It's like I'm watching what my competition is doing and they seem to be doing it better. I think it's sort of the nature of the game is that nobody's ever going to say out loud like, yep, we got it all together. We know exactly what we're doing.
Yeah. And, I think we're going to end the day, hopefully, in a really great way. We've got Dr. Garth Graham, who's the Director and Global Head of Healthcare and Public Health at Google and YouTube, ending the day with us. Dr. Graham also served as a former U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary for Minority Health under 2 different administrations. He did a lot in commissioning reports that basically showed, racial health disparities in this country. Graham is going to be sitting down with our own Jack O'Brien, who you'll hear from on this podcast, with a chat with Barry Sanders from South by Southwest. Jack is still enjoying his time from South by Southwest, which is why he's not on this podcast today. But Graham is going to be able to talk about, essentially public health and how marketers can be engaging with YouTube and Google in a more effective way. It's one of the largest platforms for video on the internet. It might be the largest. I think it still outranks TikTok at this point. And so it's a massive opportunity. Graham's going to have a lot to say about how marketers can get involved with them. Lesha, I know you in the past have written a lot about short form video, and I'm curious where you see marketers' opportunities going on short form video, as TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels continue to own our feeds.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just probably going to grow. I think pharma has been a little like hesitant in the past to jump on TikTok and stuff like that, but they have been slowly wading into it and doing it more and more and partnering with more influencers. And, you know, the younger generations are definitely watching YouTube Shorts and TikTok. They're doing less of the linear TV, even less of the streaming TV. They're mostly on their phones. That really is kind of like the future right now.
Steve, before we wrap up our little Transform preview here for next week, there is one panel that you referenced briefly before, but can we now be truly patient-centric? And you've been pushing for a while to ensure we actually have a patient voice on a panel like this. And so, what are you hoping to hopefully get out of Irene Hong, who is our patient advocate on the panel next week?
Well, the reason I pushed for it so much is that when I was reporting a piece about cancer survival rates last fall, the patients that I interviewed talked a lot about how they felt almost overlooked by the healthcare system, that they were having this experience that something that was being treated was happening to them, and yet nobody ever said, like, hey, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about the way they're going after this? And then to turn around and start to report another piece about how AI has the potential to truly produce an N of 1 when it comes to treatment. It just made me realize what a dichotomy there was there. So I think it's important that anytime we talk about patients, we actually have a patient voice there, because that lends an authority and a credibility to any discussion that we're having. And I'm sure that Irene is going to bring that to this panel.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear what she has to say, as well as the other speakers on the panel. It should be a great conversation. So I'm going to wrap up our little Transform preview. Again, it is March 31st. It is Tuesday next week in New York City. Tickets are still available. It's a great day featuring Bayer's head of AI, Brian Cantwell, Google and YouTube's head of public health, Garth Graham, and a variety of other pharma and agency speakers throughout the day. It should be a fantastic day for everybody. Should be a good one.
Plus good snacks. We always have good snacks.
Yeah, Convene always delivers great food. That is like one of the best things that you can always count on for any MM+M event that is a conference. It's always at Convene, and the food is always fantastic. All right, for Lesha Bushak and Steve Madden, I am Jameson Fleming. Thank you for listening to this week's MM+M podcast.
The MM+M podcast is produced by Bill Fitzpatrick, Gordon Thaler, Lesha Bushak, and Jack O'Brien. Rate, review, and follow every episode wherever you listen to podcasts. And be sure to check out our website, mmm-online.com, for the top news stories on the pharmaceutical industry and medical marketing agencies.